you all for being here today, and thank you to Amy and the other volunteers here at WIAD in Portland that made this possible. I'm really happy to be here. Before we get started today, and given that we're going to just take a break, I'm going to have everyone do a little something for me to start. I'd like you to look around you and find someone that you don't already know. They might be sitting next to you. We're kind of spread out here, so you might have to get up and move, which might be a good thing if we're sitting in these chairs for an hour. And introduce yourself to them, and just take a minute to tell them why you're here today. You know, we all could have chosen to do something else with our Saturday, and you all chose to come here, and we really appreciate that. But share with someone why you chose to do that, and then listen to them as they introduce themselves to you and tell them why they're here. So for those of you that hate these kinds of activities, we'll make it quick. Just find your person and go ahead and get started.
Look too far. Hi. 210? Interesting name. Never heard of a 210 before. Okay.
So I've been in the experience design business for really almost 20 years now, I hate to admit. And I started as a content designer who was doing some user testing. This was back in the mid to late 90s when we were kind of making it up as we went along, reading Jacob Nielsen and other people in the field. And over the years, I kind of changed my focus more and more towards the user side of things. I was really fascinated with what was happening in the user testing room and in the usability sessions, and really interested in how does the user perspective inform the design process and what we're doing. And to the point where that's now all I do and have been doing for over the past And about 7 or 8 years ago, I started getting really interested in the idea of empathy, and specifically the role that empathy plays in the design process. And then more broadly, you know, the role that it plays in innovation and creativity in general. In 2004, I was working at Intel, and we were running product teams through rapid iterative testing cycles. So I was spending a lot of my time in rooms that look like this. For those of you that are familiar with user labs, they're dark, cave-like rooms with little sunlight or fresh air. Yeah. But we were having a really good time. We were using the right methodology, and just kind of been popularized at Microsoft and their gaming division, and Intel was incorporating it as well. And so we were running product teams through this kind of very rapid iterative testing, which you're all familiar with now, but was relatively new at the time. Which was this idea of like, we bring users in on the first day, test the designs, then for a few days or a week, or however, depending on what stage the product development was in, the design team would, or the development team would go on and make the changes, come back, we'd test them with the users again a few days later, we'd see if the iterations they made matched, they'd go and make changes again, and then we'd come to the users a third time, and in this kind of 10-day to kind of 2 to 3 week process, they'd have kind of run their initial design ideas through users several times. And the idea was, as you're all aware of now, the idea was that they would have this kind of user-centered, user-validated design that could then kind of go into development. When we weren't in the lab, we were out in the out and about in the company, trying to basically educate people and convince people that user research was valuable and was important. And there were a lot of smart people in the industry doing some great work helping us with this. It was around 2003, I think, that Claire Marie Carat out of IBM Research published her findings that for every $1 spent fixing an issue in design, you save $10 in development and $100 post-release. This kind of information was really helping us to grow what we were doing and get more buy-in throughout the company. But also, as we were doing this testing, we were also just kind of converting engineers before our eyes. And what would happen is, because often the product teams would come in and do this right testing, but they did it because there was some kind of senior management mandate that asked them to do it. Or maybe a enlightened product manager that had seen this in the past. But a lot of times the kind of engineers and the people responsible for designing the products were brought in kind of kicking and screaming. Like, why do we need to spend a whole day of my valuable time watching a bunch of psychologists and sociologists and anthropologists talking, interviewing people? You know, how's that going to help us get a product made? But they would come in and we'd bring the first user in, and they'd watch them use the product, and invariably there would be some kind of point in the design where the user would get flustered or wouldn't know what to do or would have a problem, and they couldn't find how to complete a task. And sometimes these tasks were like core fundamental tasks that the product was trying to deliver for the users. And especially in those days before usability was even kind of like part of the general lexicon, users would say things like, oh, I'm so stupid, you know. I have no idea how to use technology, and I'm sure somebody else figured this out, but I can't figure it out. And the engineers and product team would be behind the glass, and they'd be like, yeah, who are these people? I mean, the button's right there. Why can't they just see the button? And by the 5th or 6th person that came in on that first day of user testing, you still couldn't find the button. You couldn't complete the task. The engineers behind the glass were saying, oh my God, we need to fix this product. Like, we are making something nobody knows how to use. And we need to make this happen. And so there was this kind of drive and kind of circular feeding back in. It was really great. So I did that for several years out at Intel. Ran, you know, dozens of product teams through hundreds of users. And there was this interesting thing that we started noticing. So some of the product teams would go through the process, and the iterative design process would look something like this. In fact, we were using, this looks a lot like portions of the product development lifecycle graphics that we would make, trying to explain to people, here's what user research does. You know, you bring it in, you design it, you get users, get feedback, that feeds back into your design, you iterate, test with users, you know, and that's how you get a good design. Which is great, that's a great way to look at user experience research. But this kind of illustrates kind of an A-B relationship between these two activities. So you've got the user can't figure out where a button is, you change where the button is, or you change the whole architecture of the site, whatever the case might be, and then you test it with users and see if you move the button to a place they can find it now. And this is what was happening with, you know, quite a few of the teams. Some of the teams, though, the process started looking something like this, where, yeah, there was this kind of larger meta-narrative happening, where it's like, where should the button go? But there was also, some teams were kind of bringing the users they had seen in the labs or into their design process. So they weren't just responding to what came out of the users' test sessions. They were trying to anticipate how they might design it and what the users might need that they hadn't even actually heard yet. And so this was very curious to me, you know, like, what's the difference? Why is this happening in some product teams and not in other product teams? And I think that a key part of the answer is empathy. And before I talk more about that, I want to spend a little bit of time just talking about empathy. So empathy can be defined, or is defined, with kind of two parts. They're both important. You can't have one without the other and be an empathetic person. But the first aspect of empathy is effective empathy. And this is essentially a mirrored emotional response. For those of you that study neurology, I'm talking about mirror neurons here. So you see a person stub their toe and you flinch. Or you see a spider crawling up someone's arm and you shake your arm to get it off, right? What's happening is the neurons that are firing in their brain when they stub their toe are also firing in your brain when you're observing them stub their toe. Researchers in Parma, Italy discovered these neurons in 1995. And, well, they discovered them earlier, actually, but they published a paper then, so it took them years of kind of repeating them to say, is this really what's happening? Are we really experiencing things without actually experiencing them? Are we experiencing them simply through observation? And the answer is yes. The other type of empathy is cognitive empathy. And this is kind of perspective taking, maybe the more traditional thing we think of when we think of empathy, which is like, I'm going to look at the world through your eyes, I'm going to walk in your shoes, I know how you feel. There were some researchers at Northwestern University studying the idea of empathy and the effect that it might have on us and our decisions. Testing with rhesus monkeys. So what they were doing is they brought the monkey in and they trained him that if he pulled a chain, he'd get a reward. He'd get his food. And so once the monkey realized that if I pull this chain, I get the food, then they added in a new variable. And that was that when the monkey pulled the chain, he would get his food. But he would also cause the monkey that was in the room with him to receive an electrical shock, a painful one. And so they wanted to understand, first, are they going to see that correlation? Are they going to understand that they're pulling the chain and they're causing two things to happen, the treat and the shock? And then if they understand that, is it going to change their behavior? And the answer is yes. What happened is the monkeys started pulling the chain less and less often. Some of the monkeys stopped pulling the chain altogether. And one of the monkeys didn't pull the chain for 12 days. He starved himself. And to me, this speaks to the power of empathy. I think this image does a great job of kind of expressing the idea of empathy and kind of the warm and fuzzy side of empathy, for lack of a better word. This idea of two people or two beings kind of connecting, seeing each other, understanding each other, being heard, feeling heard. And I think what was happening with those product teams back at Intel, one thing we were noticing is that the teams that were more likely to kind of munch together those processes and kind of bring the users back into back to their desks with them, back to their design review meetings with them. They were the ones that had more members observing more tests. So they had more kind of direct experience of understanding. And so one of the things that we started doing is making videos of user testing, because not everybody could come to all the tests all the time, and we thought, okay, at least somehow we've got to get that to them. We were always videoing things anyway, and we would try to do it, but it became kind of a new priority for us in terms of the way we were delivering results. Also, the teams that were designing things that were really, where the initial designs that came into the labs were really poor designs. Or, you know, I mean, we've all done it. Our best intention is we think this is going to support the activity that we're trying to allow the user to do. And we get to the lab and we're like, oh, we're wrong. When they were really off base and users were sitting there trying to complete a task and something that maybe should have taken them just a couple of seconds, and they went on, and it was taking them minutes, and 4 minutes, and 5 minutes, and 6 minutes. This is an incredibly long period of time. It seems like not very long, but when you're watching someone struggle to complete a task that you've designed for them, it becomes pretty excruciating. And so that seemed to provide this kind of emotional connection. Because when you're sitting at your computer trying to design a solution, and your aim is to design something that's easy to use and intuitive and all that, that's great, and that's a noble endeavor. When you're sitting at your computer and you're trying to design a solution that's going to ease suffering, to ease someone's suffering, that's a very different thing. And so I think that empathy can have a really powerful role in our life in how we decide, the decisions we try to decide to make, both in our product design process and outside of it. When I was in middle school in the mid-'80s in California, I was starting the civil rights movement. And I remember I went home and I was talking with my grandparents about it. They were very important in my life, very influential, and I really looked up to them. And I was talking about the civil rights movement, and my grandmother, who was in her 40s at the time, said, oh yeah, honey, when we saw them use those fire hoses and release those dogs on those poor kids, you know, we knew then that we had to do something. And I remember the moment really clearly because it was the first moment that I felt kind of disappointed in my grandparents. Because I was like, what, I'm 13 and I'm like, I don't get it. Like, segregation was wrong. Like, why did you need to see that to be moved to do something? And I remember feeling this kind of deep disappointment. And her kind of response to me was, we knew it was wrong, you know, we just didn't know how wrong. And these incidents that happened in 1963 in Alabama are cited as one of the key turning points of the civil rights movement. You know, my grandparents weren't alone. These images and video were broadcast all over the country and all over the world and are seen as a key turning point in the movement. So that, for me, speaks to the power of empathy. This thing doesn't show me what's coming next. Oh yeah. Sorry. Usually it tells you what your next slide is, so you can follow where you're going. And so empathy has always been important. I think, you know, obviously, historically, we wouldn't have developed mirror neurons and all these other kind of things if it weren't. We're social creatures. We want to be connected and find commonalities. And this is very important to us. I think empathy has a new and very different role in our world today. And so to kind of illustrate that point, I want to go and have all of us visit William for a moment. William's a blacksmith in the 1770s in colonial America for the Revolutionary War. And the world that William lives in isn't that different from the world that we've been living in as a society for thousands of years. You know, since we decided to do farming and start trading things. We basically lived the same way. So if William were to travel back in time, 500 or 1,000, 15, 2,000, 3,000 years, he would arrive in a world that looked fairly familiar to him. He would recognize it, he would have to adjust, of course, but it would basically make sense to him. And he could find out what his place was in that world. But if he were to travel forward in time just a few hundred years to now, he would see a world that looks something like this. And I think there would be no way for William to really comprehend this world. And I would argue that it's actually hard for us to comprehend this world. And we were born and raised in it. Let's imagine William's here, and we're going to explain one of the artifacts in this world, the phone. Fairly simple premise. This machine will make it so that anyone that you want to, any of your friends and family you want to talk to, it doesn't matter where they are, you can pick this up and communicate with them. It's a very primal need. This would be probably pretty exciting to him. And he would say, okay, who can make me one of those? I want one of those. The answer to who can make him one of these, of course, is no one. No one on the face of the earth knows how to make one of these. And this might seem like, oh, well, Crystal, this is a smartphone, you know, it's really complex. All right, so let's just take it down a level. Who on the planet can make him one of these? The answer is still no one, not a single person. The person that runs the pencil factory, he knows how to run a successful pencil factory. A person on the manufacturing line knows how to run the equipment that puts the pencils together. None of them know how to actually make a pencil. I'm borrowing, of course, from the famous essay by Leonard E. Read called I, Pencil. And I want to really think about this for a moment, because how many people did it take to make this pencil? So you've got the wood. That was cut down somewhere, probably in the Northwest, somewhere near us. Loggers had to go out, cut down the trees. Someone had to make the machines that made it possible for them to cut down the trees. The trees needed to get to the mill, to be milled down, to be the shape of the pencil. Someone needed to make, many people needed to make and invent how all the machinery in the mill is going to work. All right. Then they need to get on a truck and they need to go somewhere else, because the graphite, that's being mined probably in China or India. That's where most graphite comes from these days. And someone had to know how to make all that mining equipment and mine it, and then that graphite needs to get on a truck to go to the place where they're going to combine it with the other minerals that actually makes up graphite in pencils these days. So that's got to get on a truck. Someone had to make that truck. It's going to get on a road that somebody had to make. It's going to stop and get gas at a gas station that has gas that somebody had to get gas from, probably in the Middle East. And then somebody else had to invent the gas pump and then create it and make it and get it to the gas station so he can get gas and keep going to get to the port where he's going to put the graphite on a boat so they can go and meet with the wood. We haven't even gotten to the factory yet. Right? Now you go on and on. It's turtles all the way down. It probably took hundreds of thousands of people to make this pencil. So then, how many people did it take to make all the things in this little image? We've got sunglasses, t-shirts, some sort of ugly slippers, some purses, a Forever 21 bag. We've got streets and roads back there, lights, street signs, a water bottle. I think we can safely say that it took almost the entire planet to make this picture possible. And I think that's what I've done here is walked us down a certain path towards describing globalization, right? A word that's become almost meaningless, and has just been adopted by other fields to make points. But this is what globalization means in a real sense. It means that millions of people that I don't know, that I will never meet in my lifetime, are working on my behalf so that I can have this microphone, these clothes, this clicker, and that video thing, so go on the internet, and my talk can beam out to the world. And that's a beautiful thing, I think. That we have created a world that's living in a level of specialization and exchange, that all these things are possible that were never possible before. So yes, this represents globalization, but for me what it also represents is the expanding scope of empathy. So when William was living, you know, he was a blacksmith, he's making horseshoes. He makes 4 for Henry, he goes down the street, then he's going to put him on his horse. He's not making 2 million horseshoes to get transferred all over the world. He knows who he's making horseshoes for. Henry can come back and say, yeah, that horseshoe, like, that was messed up. You need to make me a new horseshoe. And he can make a new horseshoe. He understands the impact that he's having on the world and the impact that other people in the world are having on him. And the way that empathy plays a role in his life, it's manageable. Our brains work on that level. We can understand at a community level. And yes, Williams, there's some early globalization happening, there's international trade and things, but you know, generally speaking, most of his life happens right there. And most of the people are making his life possible happen right there. And so I believe we're living in a world where the scope of empathy that's required of us has outpaced our evolution. And so we need to do some real work, all of us, at building up some of these muscles so that some of the effects of globalization that we all know about can be diminished. And on a practical level, we're all here to think about how we can kind of improve our practice in our work every day. We can incorporate empathy in our lives every day because this group is a unique group. We are actually contributing to a lot of the things that we're making that world possible. We're helping design those things and provide solutions. So, what I would like to encourage us to do is to try to pull that idea of empathy into our everyday lives, and like those product teams at Intel, kind of pull the users, pull those people into the table with us at our desk when we're working on things, and in our design review meetings and around the world. And there's lots of ways we can do that. You know, we can do that through the traditional ways, like that we already know about, where we run usability tests. We get users to respond to our designs. We talk to users before we design to try to understand them. We have these kind of established ways. We can broaden our thinking too about what does it mean to be an empathetic person, and just start engaging in a general inquiry to people that we run into out in the world. Roman Krasnarek, who's kind of a leading kind of thinker in the area of empathy, he suggests that we should create empathy libraries where we can walk in, and if we want to understand what it's like to be an 87-year-old woman who lived through World War II, we can check her out. She's there at the library waiting for us. We can check her out, we can talk to her, learn more about her life. If we want to talk to a 21-year-old gamer, there he is. We can check him out, chat with him. If we want to talk to someone who used to work in a sweatshop making t-shirts, most of us buy and wear, we can check him out. We can check out a sewing machine. He can teach us how to make the t-shirt. And it can broaden our scope of empathy. Of course, that doesn't exist today. So we can just generally be more engaged when we're out and about in the world, when we're at our parties. You know, we are probably running into people that are the users of our products all the time. And so we can just kind of heighten our awareness of that and participate more with the world around us. And of course, what's always with us is our imagination. Those of you that know this artist, she lives in Central Oregon. Her blog is great. But this idea of kind of tapping into that childlike person side of us and just putting someone else's person on and looking at the world through their eyes and just practicing that level of imagination. I think pulling empathy into the process as early as possible and as often as possible is only going to help us in our design process. Simon Sinek has a book, a lot of you might have read it, it's called Start With Why. And he proposes this idea that, you know, every company kind of knows what it does. Oh, we make great computers. And then some companies also know how they do it. You know, they sleeker, faster, cheaper, whatever, that's how. Very few companies know why they do it. And he cites Apple as a key company that starts with why and works its way out in everything that they do, and that's what makes what they do, you know, better, more innovative, and helps enable what they're able to do. And I would just add to this and say, when it comes to our product design, that we really should be starting with who. And so, from who, when we understand who we're designing for, I'm not talking about just kind of general personas, which I think have their value, but I'm talking about understanding a person and having that person in mind when you're thinking about what you're doing and what problems that person is facing and how what you're doing might solve those problems. And that's how you get the why. We have, when clients come and ask us to help them with their kind of early, bring user experience into their early strategy sessions, we facilitate offsites where, you know, 2 or 3 day brainstorming sessions where teams are trying to understand where are we going to go next. You know, sometimes it's 5, 10 years out that they're trying to understand, like, how are we going to set the direction of where our products are going. And our philosophy is that you should pull the user into those discussions too. In fact, not just pull them in, but start there. Sometimes they have enough budget to allow us to go into user interviews first, and we'll put together a nice video and start the 2-day session with that video. But then we'll also ask them to, so that's kind of the traditional methods I talked about. We'll also ask the participants to interview someone that they know in their lives that might be a relevant user. So that's kind of that second method that I showed. And then once they're in the room, we ask them to use their imagination too. Imagine who that person is. Map out what the day in the life looks like. What kinds of problems are they facing? What do we want to solve, you know, for this person? And at the end of day 1 of the planning of the brainstorming session, if you will, basically what we've done is we've spent half the day talking about who, and then we've ended up with a few problem statements. We've identified the problems that this team might want to solve. And invariably, literally like in what I did last month, if someone hasn't been through the process before, and by the way, this process isn't our process. You know, this is built, like, heavily leans on what's happening at D-Thinking at Stanford and combines what Simon Sinek's talking about in UX and kind of a myriad of processes, right, that talks about how do you keep the user in the center of everything that you're doing. But invariably, at the end of the first day of the offsite, I'll have 1 or more people come up to me, very anxious, you know. What did we just wasted this whole day, you know? I mean, we talked all day and all we have is a couple of problem statements. Like, when are we going to get to what we're going to do? Because traditionally, brainstorming sessions are like, okay, everybody get in a room and throw everything, all the what's. All the what can we do goes up on the wall, and then you narrow it, and then maybe you talk a little bit about who, about the how, but the how really comes later, and maybe you never get to the why or the who. So this process makes people kind of really uncomfortable. But then on day 2, and day 2 is all about the how and the what, we have them run through basically prototyping storyboarding, scenario-based brainstorming, where they're building out the how and the what, but through the perspective of that person and those problem statements that they did the day before. So they're still driving a user through their solution, and they're using Legos and Play-Doh and color markers and pens and all these things, and they're building scenarios, and they're starting to design the solution. It's marketing managers and engineers and some designers and some executives, you know, they're all together kind of doing this process. And it's just fascinating to kind of see what happens to the level of kind of creativity and innovation and energy that comes out of that second day when you've laid this foundation of who you're designing for and why you're doing it. Because I think empathy leads to understanding, and understanding leads to good design. So before we wrap up, I want to ask you guys a question. When is the last time a product made you feel understood? And this could be deep, or it could be, who knows what, right? When I was asking myself this question, getting ready for this talk, one of the things that immediately jumped to mind for me was this. For those of you who don't recognize it, it is the button that turns on the seat warmer in my car. So I can tell you when I bought my car and I got in and I turned on that seat warmer, I felt understood. So just think for a moment about the last time the product made you feel understood. Hopefully you all have something in your mind and you can talk about it afterwards during the break. Empathy, I can't say enough, empathy I think leads to understanding, which leads to good design. For those of you who haven't seen this, this is GE Healthcare redesigned their MRI machines as pirate ships so that kids didn't have to be anesthetized to go through the machine. The numbers of kids that had to be anesthetized dropped dramatically. It was 80% of kids before they did this. To afterwards, kids saying, when do I get to do that again? Right? Empathy leads to good design. At the water wheel. Got autosave. Got Netflix. Now, when I did a screen grab of this on my TV last night, I didn't realize the empathy part of this picture is Netflix, not Dexter. Dexter, as a psychopath, is actually defined by his lack of empathy. So it probably wasn't the best screenshot for me to take. It was too late for me to do anything about it. So, but Netflix, I can tell you, the fact that they know that I like Dexter, they're going to pull up the latest episode that I haven't seen for me easily, and then deliver it to me in my living room the way I want it. That is empathy. And that is good design. And that makes me feel understood. And it also makes me a collaborator with them in their effort to revolutionize the way an entire industry does business.